You know that feeling when your brain just feels completely scrambled by nutrition advice? I was just down another protein rabbit hole again. One article says one thing, another says the exact opposite, and you're just left wondering what to believe. The big thing for me lately is this number: 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Is that really like the absolute ceiling for getting any benefits?
Yeah, that's exactly the question we're digging into today. We found this really great article from Strength by Fitness that properly explores this. It makes the case that, yeah, 1.6 grams is common, but it gives us a pretty narrow view of what protein actually does and, who might need quite a bit more.
Okay.
So our goal with this deep dive is to get past just that one number. We want to pull out some, hopefully, really useful insights, maybe even some surprising facts about how much protein could actually benefit you.
All right, so let's start with that 1.6 G figure. The article does say there's a reason it pops up so often, right? It didn't just appear out of thin air.
Oh, absolutely. No, the article explains that. For young, healthy people eating a pretty standard omnivore diet, something around 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilo per day, well, that often seems to be enough to max out muscle protein synthesis.
That's the muscle building process.
Exactly, yeah. Building new muscle tissue and hypertrophy, which is just the technical term for muscle growth, a lot of the research, especially in that specific group, points to that range.
But this feels like the crucial bit. The article argues that just looking at protein for muscle building is, well, it's like saying a smartphone is only for making calls.
Right.
It ignores everything else it does.
Precisely. The author really stresses that protein has tons of other jobs in the body, way beyond just muscle growth. And that's where sticking rigidly to 1.6 grams can be a bit misleading.
Because it misses those other functions.
Yeah, and it doesn't account for different people, different needs.
Yeah.
We're not all young, healthy omnivores, right? The article even calls out a piece on Vox, suggesting it kind of missed the mark by dismissing benefits beyond this level. That's the sort of thinking this source article is aiming to correct.
And they bring in some newer research, too, like that Hegela study from 2025, something about high-protein, lower-carb processed foods.
Yeah, exactly. That one looked at how those types of foods impact energy balance. It adds another layer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Shows we can't just look at protein grams in isolation. The whole food context matters.
Okay. But back to those other benefits, the ones beyond just muscle. What else is protein doing that might mean we need more than 1.6?
Well, one thing the article highlights, which you might not always think about, is protein as a fuel source.
Right. I usually just think carbs and fats for energy.
Yeah, but it's a key point, especially if your carb intake is on the lower side. Your body can definitely use protein for energy. Think of it as a backup generator, kind of. And maybe even more importantly, if you're in an energy deficit, like you're trying to lose fat, your protein needs actually go up.
To protect muscle.
Exactly, to help you hang on to the muscle you have while you're losing weight. So in that situation, 1.6 grams might definitely not be enough.
That makes total sense. Okay, what about exercise? We always hear athletes need more protein. Does the article get specific?
It does. It points out that after really tough workouts, could be long runs, heavy lifting, whatever your protein needs can spike. We're talking potentially over 2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Wow, over 2 grams.
Yeah, especially in that initial recovery window right after. You've stressed your body significantly, and it needs those building blocks, the amino acids, to repair and adapt.
And it's not just about the muscles themselves, you're saying?
No, that's a key point in the article. Recovery involves the whole system. It's not just patching up tiny muscle tears.
So like tendons, connective tissue,
Oh.
even organs.
Exactly that. The article talks about a symbiosis of fitness and protein. You really go hand in hand. You need sufficient protein to support that whole system repair and adaptation process to really get the most out of your training.
Okay, this next bit I'm really interested in. Plant-based protein. The article seems to draw a clear line there.
It does, yeah. For individuals following a plant-based diet, the general message is they likely need to aim for a higher total protein intake compared to omnivores.
Why is that?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, plant proteins can sometimes have slightly lower bioavailability. That just means your body might not absorb and utilize them quite as efficiently.
Okay.
And second, the amino acid profiles in single plant foods aren't always as complete as in animal sources. Protein is made of amino acids, the building blocks.
Right.
With plant foods, you often need to combine different sources throughout the day to make sure you're getting enough of all the essential amino acids your body can't make itself. It's like collecting all the puzzle pieces.
But it's not impossible, the article says. There's a workaround.
Oh, absolutely not impossible. The solution is pretty straightforward. Eat a bit more total plant protein and make sure you're getting it from a variety of sources. Beans, lentils, tofu, nuts, seeds, whole grains. Mixing it up is key.
So what kind of target are we talking then for plant-based eaters?
The article suggests that active, health-focused individuals on plant-based diets might want to aim for maybe upwards of 2.0 grams per kilogram per day, possibly even a bit more, depending on their goals and activity.
And I liked how it tackled that feeling of, is tracking this that precisely even worth it?
Yeah, the suggestion is basically that aiming a little higher, like around that 2.0 G mark or slightly above for plant-based folks, gives you safety margin.
A buffer.
Exactly, a buffer. It accounts for those potential differences in absorption and amino acid profiles without needing obsessive tracking.
Okay. Now let's get into those myths, because you hear some real doozies about high-protein diets.
Oh, absolutely. The kidney damage one is huge, right? And cancer risk. And the idea that any extra protein just instantly turns to fat.
Yeah, those exact ones. What does the article say? Does it debunk them?
Pretty directly, yeah. It references research showing that for people with healthy kidneys, intake significantly higher than 1.6 G, even going above 3.0 grams per kilogram per day, appear to be safe.
Wow, 3.0 grams.
Yeah, though it's quick to point out that doesn't mean everyone needs that much. But in terms of safety for healthy kidneys, the evidence against it isn't strong. Same goes for links to cancer or overall mortality. Higher protein doesn't seem to increase those risks based on current evidence.
Okay, that's reassuring. What about the fat gain thing? That seems like a really persistent fear.
The article tackles that too. It explains that while, yes, excess calories from any source can be stored as fat, protein is actually the least likely macronutrient to go down that path.
Less likely than carbs or fats.
Much less likely, especially if you're not in a massive overall calorie surplus. Your body has other priorities for protein, like repair and building tissues. Converting it to fat is metabolically quite expensive for the body.
Good to know. So it really sounds like this 1.6 G number is maybe a starting point for some, but it just doesn't capture the whole picture for many, many people.
That's precisely the argument. It's an average that might miss the mark for lots of individuals. The article actually details several groups who likely benefit from going quite a bit higher.
Okay, like who?
Well, endurance athletes, for one. We touched on exercise, but specifically for endurance folks, studies show benefits like better recovery and performance with intakes up around 2.0 grams per kilo compared to lower amounts like 1.8 or 1.5.
Makes sense, with all that sustained effort.
Totally. Then there are people on carb-restricted diets.
Right. The low-carb, keto crowd.
Exactly. The article suggests they might need more than 2.0 grams per kilo per day because, as we said, they're relying more on protein for energy, so they need enough to cover that, plus all the other essential protein jobs.
Okay. What about as we get older? Does that change things?
Yes, definitely. This is a really key one. The article suggests people over 40 could benefit from adding maybe an extra 0.4 grams per kilo to their daily intake.
Why is that?
Mainly because our bodies tend to become a bit less efficient at absorbing and using nutrients as we age. Plus, maintaining muscle mass gets harder,
Right.
something called anabolic resistance. So a bit more protein can help counteract that.
That's really practical advice. Now, what about individuals carrying more body fat, those classified as obese? Is the 1.6 G relevant, or do you calculate it differently?
That's another great point the article makes. It advises against calculating protein needs based on some ideal weight or just lean mass for people with obesity.
Oh, interesting. So use actual body weight.
Yes, use actual body weight and aim high, potentially 2 or even more grams per kilo per day. And crucially, focus on getting that protein from high-SPC foods, which we need to define properly in a sec.
Yeah.
This higher intake seems to really help with losing fat while holding on to precious muscle mass during weight loss.
Got it. And just like generally active people, not elite athletes, but people who exercise regularly.
Yeah, the principle holds. The article basically says the more active you are, the harder you train, the more likely you are to benefit from a higher protein intake. It's pretty logical. More demand requires more resources for repair and adaptation.
So it's not just muscle, muscle, muscle. The article also links higher protein intake to like overall health, better long-term outcomes.
Absolutely. It really emphasizes that those amino acids from protein are vital for repairing and adapting all sorts of tissues, not just muscle. Bones, skin, immune cells, hormones, enzymes, they all rely on protein.
Right.
And while you can sometimes find studies focusing on one specific amino acid and maybe a potential negative link to a disease if you zoom in really close, the article argues that when you look at the overall dietary pattern, Higher protein intake is generally associated with better health markers and lower risk for many chronic diseases, and even lower all-cause mortality.
Okay, this is painting a much bigger picture. Now, you mentioned higher SPC foods when talking about obesity. Let's unpack that. What does SPC stand for?
Right, SPC stands for higher satiating, higher protein, higher carbohydrate. But the article clarifies that the C for carbohydrate here really implies nutrient-dense carbs, so it's more about overall nutrient density.
So foods that fill you up are high in protein and also packed with other nutrients relative to their calories.
Exactly. Think lean meats, fish, eggs, dairy, legumes, tofu, vegetables, foods that give you more protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals per calorie. You're getting more nutritional bang for your buck, essentially.
So it's not just about the protein number itself, but the quality of the food sources providing that protein.
Precisely. The article argues that getting higher protein intake within the context of a diet rich in these higher SPC foods is where the real magic happens for health, body composition, and performance. It's the synergy.
And the benefits of this combined approach, high protein, high SPC, they seem pretty broad according to the article.
Yeah, that's a major takeaway. It suggests this approach generally leads to better fitness progress, improved overall health, better body composition management, maybe even sharper cognitive function, and definitely enhanced recovery from exercise.
Is there anyone who shouldn't focus solely on high SPC?
Well, the article acknowledges that some very high-level endurance athletes might sometimes need to strategically include some lower SPC, higher energy foods just to meet their massive energy demands during extreme events. But for most of us, most of the time, prioritizing higher SPC foods is the recommended strategy.
So this way of eating, it's not really a short-term diet, is it? It sounds more like a long-term approach.
Exactly. The article really positions this as a lifelong habit. A nutritionally rich, high-protein, higher SPC way of eating for sustained health and well-being, not just a temporary fix.
And it circles back to that general recommendation.
Yeah, it reiterates that for most people, aiming for roughly 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, or potentially more, is a good baseline goal.
Unless there's a specific medical reason not to. Right. The main caveat mentioned is for individuals with advanced chronic kidney disease, like CKD stages 4 and 5, where protein intake usually does need to be medically managed and restricted. But for most healthy individuals, that 2.0 G plus seems like a solid target.
And it even offers slightly different tweaks depending on your body composition goal.
It does. It suggests that if fat loss is the primary goal, you might nudge protein intake even higher, always emphasizing those high SPC foods to help with satiety and muscle retention.
Okay.
Conversely, if someone is already very lean and maybe struggling to maintain weight or performance, they might need to consciously add more energy, perhaps from nutrient-dense sources like fruits, berries, or maybe even some specifically designed higher energy SPC protein bars alongside their high protein intake.
This has been incredibly clarifying, seriously helpful for cutting through the confusion around protein. If people listening want to explore the science more, did the article mention specific studies? It did, yeah. It referenced a whole bunch covering things like high-protein diet effects generally, human evolution and energy needs, genetics, endurance athlete requirements specifically, nutrition trends, and, importantly, studies looking directly at high protein and kidney health, plus that review debunking the common myths we talked about.
Great, so lots for people to look into if they want to go deeper.
Definitely.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, it really sounds like the main message is that our protein needs are often, maybe usually, higher than that standard 1.6 G recommendation suggests.
Yeah, definitely.
And the benefits stretch way beyond just muscle growth, impacting overall health, recovery, and body composition, especially for specific groups or just generally active people.
And crucially, how you get that protein matters.
Yeah.
Focusing on those nutrient-dense higher SPC foods seems key.
That's a perfect summary. It really boils down to considering your own situation, right?
Yeah.
Your activity, your goals, your age, your overall diet. It's not a one-size-fits-all number.
Not at all.
So I guess a final thought for everyone listening is, given all this information, how might you reevaluate your own protein intake and maybe the types of foods you prioritize day to day?